On the Track is a web TV show about cryptozoology, natural history, green issues and whatever else the team feel like making up as they go along. Enjoy!
This week we have some very special guests. We will be meeting a troop of cartoon ants who live inside a block of wood.
I think that the more cartoon ants you have in serious scientific television, the better. Well done to everybody involved.
I really like the old credits.
So what do we have in this episode, Mr. John?
Well, Hennis, first of all we go to the late Jurassic period, which was between 145 and 163 million years ago. And then we're going to Hong Kong in the first half of the 20th century. And if you could stay until the end, you're going to find out something really quite surprising. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is John Downs. I'm the director of the Centre for Fortean Zoology, and welcome to another episode of On the Track. For those of you not aware, and I'm so glad to be able to report that each week we're getting slightly more viewers than the week before. So that means, extrapolating from that some of you aren't aware that every Saturday afternoon for half an hour and every Wednesday evening for about half that, we bring you a miscellany of hard science, weird shit, and what's it called? Surreality, of course. And you don't know what surreality is? Well, cop a load of this. There's a little baby chicken and he likes to sing. Ho, 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 ho. Okay, Richard. Probably, apart from Tyrannosaurus Rex, probably the most famous dinosaur within popular culture is the Brontosaurus.
John, young people don't need Brontosauruses. We're too busy putting micro doses of LSD behind our eyeballs to increase our creativity.
Except the Brontosaurus isn't called Brontosaurus. It was changed to Apatosaurus because of the a priori naming conventions. But didn't you tell me that's all changed now?
Yes, it has. The long and confusing story of Brontosaurus. It started with a fossil sauropod dinosaur skull found in the wonderfully named Felch Quarry. And this sauropod skull was long and thin, vaguely horse-shaped, similar to the skull of a sauropod dinosaur called Diplodocus, but it was lacking a body. Sometime later, a body was found, a fossilised skeleton was found, lacking the skull. Now, the skull, when it was found, was called Apatosaurus. The body, when it was found, was called Brontosaurus, because it was a very different shape from Diplodocus. It was a much more stout, less elongate sort of sauropod, very similar in shape to a dinosaur called Camarasaurus. So Brontosaurus was recreated with a sort of short snub snout on the skull, which it was missing, this box-shaped skull. So in all the early reconstructions and in old dinosaur movies, you'll see Brontosaurus with this rather cute little snub snout. And because this lasted for a long time, this is how we thought that Brontosaurus looked. And then somebody said, hang on a minute, what if the Apatosaurus skull is actually part of the Brontosaurus skeleton? What if they go together? And they put them together and thought, yes, yeah, it does go with the skeleton. We were wrong all along, but because the skull was found first, the name Apatosaurus, deceptive lizard, has precedence over the much more popular and much more evocative name of Brontosaurus, thunder lizard. So, for years and years and years, for decades, it was thought that Brontosaurus didn't exist, until fairly recently, when they found that the skull and the skeleton were indeed separate. They didn't go together, and they found the skull to go with the skeleton, which was long and thin, like a Diplodocus skeleton, and like the original Apatosaurus skeleton, but distinct. So, Apatosaurus was one thing, Brontosaurus was another thing. Brontosaurus was earlier and slightly smaller than Apatosaurus. They were related, but they had these long, thin, horsey skulls, a bit like Diplodocus, but chunky bodies like Camarasaurus. And apparently there were 3 types of Brontosaurus. So that is the long and confusing story of Brontosaurus and how it was given the boot and then resurrected again.
There's been a similar story, except it didn't have such of a nomenclature happy ending. But the duck-billed platypus, its Latin name can't be platypus because the word platypus had already been given to a fairly dull bunch of burying beetles, which is why the duck-billed platypus's Latin name is Ornithorhynchus rather than platypus. It's one of those strange things that the nomenclature laws of naming, sometimes, mostly it makes sense, but sometimes they throw up all sorts of little oddities like this.
Well, beetles hog the names of everything. Beetles hog scientific names all the time because there's so many of them. And 1 in every 4 creatures is a beetle.
No, there were only 4 of them. They came from Liverpool and had a few hit records.
The move were right all along.
I believe, Richard, there's one other aspect to the Brontosaurus story that actually impacts at least theoretical cryptozoology. For years we were told that sauropods like Brontosaurus lived in water because their weight wouldn't allow them. They would collapse under their own weight if they wanted life on land, a bit like whales. But that's not true anymore, is it?
No. The idea that sauropod dinosaurs lived habitually in water because of their great weight was disproven over 50 years ago. If you look at very old pictures of them, you'll see them with just the tops of their heads sticking out of the water and feeding off soft water plants. But if you think they're taking a breath, and that breath has to be drawn right the way down 20, 30, 40 feet of neck to the lungs would collapse, and the pressure of the water would collapse the trachea as well. Sauropod dinosaurs had robust, heavy, strong bones. They had pillar-like legs. They lived on land like elephants or giraffes in herds, and their teeth were peg-like. They used them for stripping vegetation, which would be swallowed and then masticated in the muscular gizzard. They had a gizzard like birds. and they would swallow stones. These stones are called gastroliths, and use those stones to chew with the muscular gizzard, grinding the stones together over the plant material, turning it into a pulp. And when the stones became too smooth, they would vomit them up and get new ones, because they had to have sharp edges to crush the plant material. So these were terrestrial animals. Of course, they would have gone to water to drink, and they would have probably wallowed and bathed in the way that elephants and rhinos do, but they didn't live habitually in water.
And that, boys and girls, ladies and gentlemen, is about all that we have for you on the subject of brontosauruses. And now we go back to John Saeki for the second part of our conversation about his fantastic new book, The Last Hong Kong Tiger.
And I think there's so much more room to explore all those kinds of stories as well. And as I feel as if the book that I put together is, maybe with a bit of luck, it's just opening up the topic. And just as your article triggered me to go on to do this later, it would be amazing if an actual scientist decided to do a thorough scientific investigation, because my book, of course, has absolutely no claims to be a scientific piece of work. It's an assessment of written records that were available, and trying to put that in the context of the limited knowledge of science I have. But it's not a scientific piece of work. It's not academic. But maybe if one day someone, a young biology student, decided to take it on, it would be amazing. And then they'd be, hopefully investigating at more depth all of these cases.
I was surprised how many reports there were from the island, proving that
Hong Kong,
they could swim over, that tigers were perfectly capable of swimming the channel.
Yeah, it was. There was. Did you? There was a writer called Vinja that I came across.
Yes, I came across him as well.
Yeah, and he was writing just before the Japanese invasion, and he was the one who said he was worried about the blackout on the peak, because he suddenly noticed that there were so many fireflies on the mountain, and they were glowing in unison, and he started to worry that that could alert the Japanese bombers to where the peak residence was. Later, he concluded that actually the light wouldn't have been strong enough. But Vinja also wrote about a tiger appearance on Hong Kong Island in 1941, and he wrote, and it was the first time a tiger has ever been recorded on Hong Kong Island. And I knew that I was wrong, because the first one I found in the archives went back to 1911, I believe. And as you say, intermittently, they were coming to Hong Kong Island. They also, there were reports on Lantau, plenty on Lantau, and Lamar Island, and also on Ching Yi. And I did find it difficult at first to understand how tigers could swim so well, but I also had the same feeling about the wild boars. So I lived on Lamar Island for a long time, and when I first went to live on Lamar Island in the late 90s, there were no wild boars on Lamar Island, or we didn't come across them, and people said that they had been hunted out of existence. But it was around the 2005-07 that more and more wild boar reports came through on Lamar Island itself, and by the time I left in 2020, very, very well established and very comfortable, quite near people, and the ones that first came had swum, and then I saw a video. Somebody took a video of a wild boar swimming across the Lamar Channel, and it was remarkable. It was an amazing, amazing aquatic beast during that time while it was in the water.
Well, I lived in Hong Kong between 1961, when I was a baby, and 1971. And at the time I left, there were two small family groups of wild boar only in the whole of the colony. They were living out in deep bay marshes. And I remember as a boy asking why they couldn't colonize some of the other islands. And I was told, totally deadpan, this was by the chief of police in Hong Kong back then, that they couldn't swim because if they swam, their plotters would cut their throats. The way they would swim would be like that, and their plotters would go up and cut their throats, which is obviously complete nonsense.
Gosh.
Like you said, you've seen video of swimming. They're on all the islands now.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
It's one of the great.
Exactly. So
yeah.
If we can see, yeah. Please
to me, it's one of the great lessons I learned was that populations of animals don't stay static. Something that was incredibly rare and thought to be almost extinct is now a pest with the wild boar. The crab-eating mongoose and the otter were both thought to be extinct, and they're both thriving now.
Yeah.
I've always thought Hong Kong is a fascinating living laboratory for a lot of stuff about animal behavior and animal distribution. And I think your tiger is a fantastic addition to that.
Thank you. It's really great to hear, and I agree that it is. It was such an unexpected wildlife laboratory, and really, it was living in Hong Kong that made me interested in wildlife. I mean, I always appreciated going for walks and had a passing interest in animals, but it was really Hong Kong, living in Hong Kong, discovering the extent of the greenery in Hong Kong. And a lot of it starts with the birds. You start noticing the birds. You want to know what they're called. You want to know their habits, and then you find out about my hole, and then you hear about the crab-eating mongoose and the migratory paths of the birds and how Hong Kong's part of that. And it really wasn't what I expected when I went to live in Hong Kong, that I would become so interested in wildlife.
One of the things I liked most about your book was the way that you put each set of sightings into a historical context, and you framed them with what was going on in Hong Kong at the time. And I found that fascinating, but also very gratifying, because it's the way I like to write. I think it's important, rather than just putting things in isolation, to put things against the wider picture.
Thanks. It's great to hear. I think for me, it was the only way I could write about it, because, as I say, I wasn't making a scientific report on the ecology and the behavior of migrant tigers. Even, of course, it was absolutely fascinating to see all these reports about tigers in Hong Kong, but actually they start to follow a pattern and they become very similar. It's a fleeting sighting here, a growl that was heard here, a pig was taken, cattle was taken, and the tigers themselves didn't seem to very sort of in any dramatic way change their behavior until they were forced to change by being hunted out. But during this time, Hong Kong was completely transforming in society. So the dynamic kind of thrust and change in the book was society that was changing. So the context that the tigers were in. So at the beginning, when the British took over the new territories, and it was a very old world that the British went into, and it was an old world that the tigers, I'm sure, were very familiar with, and they probably passed on their folklore through their generation. But that that world had completely changed. Certainly by 1941, when the Japanese came, and then by 1960s, again, that was a completely different world. And I mentioned that the Beatles visited Hong Kong, around that time of the last sighting. So because for my generation, modernity seems to begin with the kind of the Beatles time, and we can sort of relate to that. But before that, it's like this very ancient world, which is in a historical context such a short period of time, but something that had probably seemed eternal in 1910 had just disappeared completely by the 60s while Hong Kong changed.
And
so I thought it's part of the story.
The Hong Kong I knew doesn't exist anymore.
Yeah.
I left in 1971. I went back in 1980 for a week's holiday, and it was changed dramatically even then. And that was 42 years ago. And I want to go back. I've got enough money to go back, and I don't know if I dare go back because I don't know if it'll just destroy all my memories.
Well, I mean, I was there for 20 years, from the end of 99 to 2020, and it gradually changed during that period until 2014, and then suddenly everything changed, especially after I left in 2020. So, I mean, like you say, it's like the animals. I mean, places change as well. I do believe Hong Kong, has definitely changed a lot, but that greenery is still there. The crab-eating mongoose is still there. The boars are there. Mai Po is still this amazing wetland sanctuary, and it brings all the wetland birds and then the big raptors that are coming after the wetland birds. So it's incredible that that kind of that aspect of Hong Kong has turned out to be more enduring. Unfortunately, not for the tigers, because the tigers were too big and I think too frightening for the expanding population of South China, it seems.
Yes, I think there will never be another Hong Kong tiger.
I can't see it, no. I'm afraid, but
maybe
we should never say never, but yes,
I don't know. Possibly if somebody fenced off a large area of the Sai Kung Peninsula and released there, but they wouldn't be real Hong Kong tigers. That it'd be man-made, and it wouldn't be the real.
Yeah.
So, what are you doing next? What's your next project?
I am trying to work that out myself. I have been tinkering away at a fiction while I was waiting for the non-fiction to be published and edited and published, and I'm going to see if I can tempt a publisher with that. It's a kind of a follow-on from my first fiction, The Tiger Hunters of Tao. But after that, I think I'm looking for another non-fiction. I live in Yorkshire now, and much as I love Hong Kong, I think you need to do your research where you are, really. And I'm thinking about what could be done in Yorkshire. I was actually thinking about ferrets, but I haven't got very far. I don't. Yeah. But it's at this point, it's just an idea that has no particular substance. But I started getting curious. How did this whole tradition of ferrets start? What's it about? What's going on now? Who's still doing it? Are they domesticated, or are they sort of really wild? All these questions that I'm quite interested in, but I won't know until I've done enough research to decide whether there's enough for other people to also be interested. Well, there was one more project that I've always been. Yeah.
Carry on.
Well, there was one more which isn't really a writing one, but an editing one. I think it'd be great if somebody got hold of the Hong Kong Naturalist Archives, which has amazing records from the 1930s, and did a kind of a selected reader from it. Just highlight, for example, there was an account about freshwater jellyfish in Hong Kong waters.
Do you know where else
in the
you
30s.
can find them? How far are you from Doncaster? There is a canal at Doncaster which every few years gets a bloom of these Crescentata sowerby, the freshwater jellyfish.
Gosh, I had no idea. A canal. Oh, I'm pretty near, yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
I've been meaning for years to go up there and see them, and I never have.
So in a certain time of the year.
Yep. If I were you, I would contact your local. There is a museum in Doncaster, from memory, that has a really good natural history section. Contact them; they'll tell you about it.
Right. That's
and
fantastic.
It's the same species that Herclots talks about.
Gosh, that's incredible. How do freshwater jellyfish from, this part of the world also be the same species as freshwater jellyfish from another part of the world? Did they have a period when they went through saltwater? Or it's amazing.
Nobody seems to know. They're probably a man-made vector, but nobody seems to know.
Right.
If you want to support us and help us make more content like these, please press like, subscribe, follow our Facebook page and check out our Patreon.
And as the ghost of Joe Strummer, who's an ever more regular visitor to my little studio, wants me to remind you, always press the notification bell. Otherwise you won't be told when there's a new show to watch.
And that would be an awful pity, wouldn't it?
Well, ladies and gentlemen, that's about it for this episode. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you'll continue to support us. I want to say a big thank you to everybody involved in this episode, particularly my producer Louis, and to my guests this week, who were Richard Freeman and John Saeki, both of whom could not have been matched by anybody else. Thank you to you all, and thank you to all the people out there who watch the show and keep on supporting us. If you want to get more involved with the CFZ, go to the CFZ website, www.cfz.org.uk, and look under the section saying jobs, because there's a long list of things that we need people to do for us here at the CFZ, that you, if you've got an hour or so a week, that you can devote to helping us push back the boundaries of human knowledge, you'll really be able to help. Please go and have a look and see if there's anything there you fancy doing. Now, before we go, are you ready, Mr. McCrinnan? Because, by the way, for those of you who don't know, my old mate V. McCrinnan always tries to match what I say at the end of the show, so I always give him a verbal heads up that I'm just about to say that we're going to be back on Wednesday, and we're going to be back next Saturday. Do I know what's going to be in any of them? No. But you're just going to have to wait and see. Because if I'm there, performing in front of the camera for your delectation, and you're there watching me, I'm going to be seeing you. Did you get that, McCrinnan?